Some souls don't bark for attention. They wait for the one person who still remembers them. Rain hammered the streets of Harbor Point just after midnight, turning the asphalt into a river of blurred red and blue reflections beneath Officer Ethan Walker's patrol car. The windshield wipers dragged slowly across the glass with a tired rhythm that matched the ache behind his eyes. 12 years on the force had taught him one thing about the night shift in this part of Oregon. The city never truly slept. It only learned how to hide its pain better after dark. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the cold paper cup of stale gas station coffee beside him. The heater barely worked. Neither did he, most days. A dispatch voice crackled softly through the radio about a noise complaint 3 blocks east, but he ignored it for a second, staring instead at the empty sidewalks soaked in silver rain. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn moaned through the fog. Long, lonely. Familiar. Then he saw it. A German shepherd sitting perfectly still in the middle of the intersection under the red traffic light. Cars swerved around it. Headlights flashed across wet black fur. Horns blared. But the dog never moved. Not an inch. Ethan slowed the cruiser immediately. "Come on, buddy," he muttered under his breath. The dog turned its head slowly toward him, and something inside Ethan's chest tightened. The animal looked old. Its coat was damp and uneven around the ribs. One ear carried a scar near the tip. Rainwater dripped from its muzzle as it stared directly into the patrol car window like it recognized the man behind it. Ethan pulled to the curb and stepped out into the storm. Cold rain soaked through his jacket within seconds. "Easy," he called softly. "You're going to get yourself killed out here." The shepherd didn't run, didn't growl. It simply watched him approach beneath the flickering red light overhead. Ethan stopped a few feet away. The dog's breathing was heavy but calm, white vapor curling into the freezing air. Then the shepherd took one slow step forward. Ethan noticed the old leather collar around its neck. Cracked, weathered, nearly falling apart. A brass tag hung beneath it, tapping softly against the metal ring. The sound stopped Ethan cold. His pulse stumbled, because somehow he knew that sound. The dog stepped closer again, close enough now for Ethan to see the cloudy age around its amber eyes. And despite the rain, despite the years, despite every logical reason this couldn't be possible, Ethan felt recognition hit him like a ghost walking out of the dark. The shepherd lowered its head slightly, waiting, trusting. Ethan's throat tightened as he crouched slowly onto one knee. His fingers trembled when they reached for the old brass tag hanging from the collar. Rainwater slid down his wrist. The city noise faded into nothing. And the moment he turned the tag over beneath the red traffic light, the world seemed to stop breathing with him. The brass tag trembled lightly in Ethan's hand as rainwater rolled across the faded engraving. Rex. The letters were scratched and worn from time, but still there. Still real. Ethan stared at them for several seconds without breathing. His pulse echoed inside his ears louder than the rain. 5 years. 5 long years since anybody had seen that dog. The shepherd stood silently in front of him beneath the red traffic light, its soaked fur glistening under the street lamp like old black velvet. Older now. Thinner too. But the eyes had not changed. Those same intelligent amber eyes that used to watch Ethan through the rearview mirror during night patrols. Those same eyes that stayed beside him outside Mercy General Hospital the night his wife never came home. Ethan swallowed hard and slowly lowered himself closer. Rex. The name barely escaped his throat. The dog's ears twitched instantly. Then came the sound Ethan had not heard in years. A low whine. Soft. Emotional. Almost human. The shepherd stepped forward and gently pressed its head against Ethan's chest. Ethan closed his eyes the moment the weight touched him. For one dangerous second, the entire city disappeared. No sirens. No rain. No cold wind sweeping through Harbor Point. Just memory. Warm kitchen light. His wife Olivia laughing while Rex lay beside the dinner table waiting for scraps he was never supposed to get. The smell of coffee on Sunday mornings. The old baseball game playing quietly on television while rain tapped against their apartment windows. Before grief turned the world gray. Before silence moved into his home and never left. Ethan opened his eyes quickly, forcing the memories back down where they belonged. "I thought you were gone," he whispered. Rex stayed close, breathing heavily against his jacket. Ethan noticed fresh mud along the dog's paws and a small tear near the collar buckle. Whatever life Rex had survived these past years, it had not been kind. A car splashed through the intersection nearby, snapping Ethan back into the present. He looked around. Empty sidewalks. Closed diners. Flickering neon signs reflecting in puddles. Harbor Point looked colder than usual tonight, as if the city itself had forgotten how to care about anything left wandering in the rain. Ethan slowly removed his own jacket and draped it across Rex's back. The shepherd did not move away. "Come on," Ethan muttered. "You are not staying out here." He guided Rex toward the patrol car. The old dog hesitated near the passenger door for half a second before climbing inside on his own. Muscle memory. Same seat. Same position. Ethan stared through the open door, stunned by how naturally Rex curled onto the worn fabric as though no time had passed at all. The scent inside the cruiser changed immediately. Wet fur. Rain. Old leather. Strange how certain smells could reopen parts of a man he thought were dead forever. Ethan slid into the driver's seat quietly. Rex rested his head near the center console without taking his eyes off him. Then the police radio crackled again. Dispatch reported another missing child poster being added downtown. 8 years old. Female. Last seen near the Harbor District. Ethan listened silently while rain rolled across the windshield in silver streams. Beside him, Rex suddenly lifted his head. His ears sharpened toward the darkness ahead. And for the first time all night, the old dog growled. The growl coming from Rex was low enough to almost disappear beneath the sound of rain tapping against the patrol car roof, but Ethan felt it immediately. Not fear. Not aggression. Warning. The old German shepherd stared through the windshield toward the harbor district beyond downtown Harbor Point, where rusted shipping cranes stood like giant skeletons against the fog. Ethan followed the dog's gaze for several seconds before reaching for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Send me the information on the missing child." Static crackled softly before the operator answered. "Female, 8 years old. Emma Collins. Missing approximately 3 hours. Last seen near Pier 47 wearing a yellow raincoat." Pier 47. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. That section of the harbor had mostly died years ago after the shipping companies moved south. Empty warehouses. Broken chain-link fences. Drifters trying to survive winter nights beside trash barrel fires. The kind of place where the city stopped looking too closely. Beside him, Rex let out another quiet growl. Ethan glanced over. "You smell something?" The dog immediately stood up in the passenger seat. Slow but alert. His nose pressed lightly toward the cracked window, as if chasing a scent carried through the storm itself. Ethan had seen that posture thousands of times before. Back when Rex was younger. Faster. Before retirement paperwork and grief buried both of them alive. The memories came harder now. Ethan gripping a flashlight while Rex searched abandoned buildings during narcotics raids. Kids smiling during school demonstrations while Rex proudly trotted beside him. Olivia laughing when Rex stole hamburger buns straight off the kitchen counter one 4th of July evening. Then the hospital room. White walls. Machines humming softly in darkness. Ethan sitting motionless beside his wife after the drunk driver took almost everything from him in a single night. Rex had stayed under Ethan's chair for 11 straight hours without moving. After the funeral, the dog changed. Stopped eating. Stopped responding to commands. Then one morning, Rex simply vanished from the backyard while Ethan slept on the couch beside an untouched bottle of whiskey. Nobody ever found him. Until tonight. Ethan exhaled slowly and started the engine. "All right," he whispered quietly. "Show me." Rain streaked across the windshield as the cruiser rolled through downtown streets glowing with wet neon signs and flickering traffic lights. Harbor Point looked exhausted after midnight. Diners nearly empty. Laundromats humming quietly behind fogged windows. Somewhere a saxophone played faintly from an apartment above a pawn shop, lonely notes drifting through the storm like old memories refusing to die. Rex stayed standing the entire drive. His eyes never left the road ahead. Every few blocks, he shifted slightly, restless, focused. Then near the old cannery district, the dog suddenly barked once. Sharp. Immediate. Ethan slowed the cruiser near a row of abandoned warehouses wrapped in rust and darkness. "Easy," he muttered. Rex pressed closer to the passenger window. His breathing quickened. Ethan noticed something then. Fresh bicycle tracks cutting through the muddy alley beside Warehouse 8. Small tires. Child-sized. barely visible beneath the rain. The radio hissed softly again with another update from dispatch, but Ethan no longer listened. Because beside him, Rex had started whining under his breath while staring directly toward the dark alley ahead. And somehow, Ethan knew the dog remembered this place. Rain drifted sideways through the harbor as Ethan stepped out of the patrol car beside Warehouse 8. The cold air smelled like rust, seawater, and old oil soaked deep into concrete after decades of storms. Somewhere nearby, loose metal clanged softly against a chain in the wind. Rex jumped down from the passenger seat slower than he used to, but the moment his paws touched the pavement, something changed in him. The old shepherd straightened, focused, alive again. Ethan watched quietly as Rex moved toward the alley beside the warehouse with his nose low to the wet ground. The yellow glow from a broken security lamp flickered overhead, casting long shadows across puddles and cracked asphalt. Ethan pulled his flashlight from his belt. "Easy, partner," he murmured. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Partner. He had not called anyone that in years. Rex paused for half a second when he heard it. His tail moved once. Just once. Then he continued forward. The alley narrowed between stacks of rusted shipping containers stained dark from rain and age. Water dripped steadily from fire escapes overhead. Ethan followed closely, boots splashing through shallow puddles while the beam from his flashlight cut through fog drifting in from the docks. The bicycle tracks continued ahead before disappearing near an old loading door hanging partially open. Rex stopped immediately. His ears lifted. The growl returned under his breath. Ethan slowly approached the doorway. Inside, darkness swallowed almost everything beyond a few feet. The smell changed there. Damp wood, mold, and something else. Something faintly metallic beneath it all. Ethan swept the flashlight across the floor. Empty crates, torn tarps, graffiti peeling from concrete walls. Nothing moved. But Rex refused to step away from the entrance. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. The shepherd suddenly looked toward the far end of the warehouse where an old freight elevator sat abandoned beneath hanging chains. The elevator doors were slightly open, just enough to reveal darkness inside. Ethan felt the hairs rise along the back of his neck. Then came a sound so faint, he almost thought the storm created it. A soft tapping noise. 3 quick taps. Then silence. Rex immediately pulled forward. Ethan grabbed the collar gently. "Wait." The dog looked back at him with sharp, alert eyes that seemed to say the same thing they always had during searches years ago. "Hurry." Ethan released the collar slowly. Together they crossed the warehouse floor. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling beams high above them. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the harbor. Ethan reached the elevator carefully and pushed the flashlight beam inside. Empty. Rusted cables. Dust. But near the back wall, half hidden beneath debris, sat something small and bright against the gray concrete floor. A yellow raincoat. Child-sized. Ethan's stomach tightened instantly. He crouched and picked it up slowly. Still damp. Still warm. Rex began pacing in tight circles nearby, whining softly now instead of growling. Nervous. Urgent. Ethan checked his watch. Emma Collins had been missing less than 4 hours, which meant whoever brought her here had not gone far. The realization settled cold and heavy inside his chest. Then Rex suddenly froze again. His head turned sharply toward the far wall behind the elevator shaft. Ethan listened carefully. At first there was only rain and distant thunder. Then he heard it. A tiny sound hidden beneath the storm. A child coughing somewhere behind the concrete wall. The sound came again. Weak. Fragile. A child trying not to cry too loudly. Ethan immediately pressed one hand against the cold concrete wall behind the freight elevator while Rex paced beside him in restless circles. The German shepherd kept looking toward a narrow section near the floor where old water stains ran down the cement like dark veins. Ethan knocked twice against the wall. Solid on one side, hollow on the other. His pulse quickened. "Emma," he called carefully. Silence answered at first except for rain hammering the warehouse roof overhead. Then a tiny voice drifted through the darkness. "Please do not leave me here." Ethan closed his eyes for one brief second. Relief and dread crashing together inside his chest. "You are okay," he answered quickly. "My name is Officer Walker. I am going to get you out." Beside him, Rex stopped pacing. His ears lifted sharply toward the entrance of the warehouse. Ethan noticed it immediately. The dog had heard something else. Footsteps. Distant. Outside, near the loading docks, Ethan's hand instinctively moved toward the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I found the missing child at Warehouse 8, near Pier 47. Requesting immediate backup. Static hissed through the speaker before dispatch answered. Copy that, Unit 12. Closest units are approximately 12 minutes out due to weather conditions. 12 minutes. Ethan glanced around the warehouse. Too long. The storm outside had worsened, rattling the loose metal siding hard enough to make the entire structure groan softly. Rex moved closer to the loading entrance now, standing protectively between Ethan and the darkness beyond. Ethan crouched near the concrete wall again, scanning for any kind of latch or hidden access point. His flashlight beam finally caught something near a stack of broken pallets. Fresh scrape marks across the floor. Someone had been moving the pallets recently. He shoved them aside quickly, revealing a rusted steel hatch barely visible beneath years of grime. A chain secured it loosely from the outside. Ethan removed it immediately and pulled the hatch open. Warm air escaped from below, carrying the smell of dust, damp blankets, and canned food. Hidden beneath the warehouse floor was a narrow maintenance room lit only by a tiny battery lantern. Curled beneath an old blanket sat a little girl wearing soaked socks and trembling hands. Her yellow raincoat was missing. Emma Collins looked smaller than Ethan expected. Exhausted too. The moment she saw the police badge on his chest, tears filled her eyes. It is okay now, Ethan said gently while climbing down into the room. You are safe. The girl looked past him suddenly, toward Rex, standing guard at the hatch above. The dog found me, she whispered. Ethan glanced back at the shepherd. Rainwater still dripped from Rex's fur as he stared toward the warehouse in trance without blinking once. Alert. Listening. Waiting. Ethan carefully wrapped Emma in his jacket and reached for the radio again, but before he could speak, Rex let out a deep bark that echoed violently through the warehouse. Not panic. Warning. Then came the unmistakable sound of an engine outside slowly shutting off near the loading dock. Ethan froze instantly. Heavy footsteps splashed through puddles just beyond the open warehouse doors. Somebody was coming back. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath the moment the footsteps entered from the loading dock. Slow. Careful. Splashing through shallow puddles outside before crossing onto concrete. Ethan immediately killed his flashlight and crouched lower beside Emma inside the hidden maintenance room beneath the floor. Above them, Rex stood at the open hatch like a shadow carved from rain and muscle, silent now except for the low rumble deep in his chest. Emma clutched Ethan's sleeve with trembling fingers. Is it him? She whispered. Ethan looked at the fear in her eyes and forced his voice to stay calm. You stay behind me, okay? You are doing great. The little girl nodded weakly beneath his patrol jacket wrapped around her shoulders. Somewhere above them, metal scraped softly against concrete. Whoever entered the warehouse was moving slowly. Listening. Ethan reached for the radio again, but only static answered him now. The storm outside had swallowed the signal completely. He glanced up toward Rex. The old shepherd remained perfectly still near the hatch opening, ears sharp, eyes fixed toward the darkness beyond the freight elevator. Ethan had seen that look before during searches years ago. Rex only became that focused when danger moved close. Very close. Another sound echoed through the warehouse. A flashlight clicking on somewhere beyond the shipping crates. Thin beams of light drifted across the ceiling overhead. Ethan carefully guided Emma deeper into the maintenance room beside dusty shelves stacked with old paint cans and rotting cardboard boxes. The air down there felt warmer but stale, carrying the scent of mildew and old concrete trapped underground for decades. Emma rubbed her cold hands together. The man said nobody comes here when it rains, she whispered quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. You are safe now. But even he could hear the uncertainty inside his own voice. Above them, Rex suddenly barked once. Loud, sharp, immediate. The flashlight beam upstairs jerked violently toward the sound. Footsteps quickened across the warehouse floor. Ethan's pulse spiked. Rex? He whispered under his breath. The shepherd backed away from the hatch slowly, drawing attention toward the far side of the warehouse. Another bark echoed through the darkness, followed by the sound of claws skidding across wet concrete. Ethan understood instantly what the dog was doing. Creating distance. Buying time. Then came the sound of someone running after him through the warehouse. Ethan seized the moment. Come on. He helped Emma climb the metal ladder leading out of the maintenance room. Her small sneakers slipped once on the wet rung, but Ethan caught her gently before guiding her upward. Rain hammered the roof harder now, drowning much of the noise beyond the elevator shaft. The warehouse looked emptier than before. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor, while distant flashlight beams flickered somewhere near the loading dock where Rex had disappeared into the darkness. Ethan lifted Emma into his arms and hurried toward the side exit near the alley. Every instinct inside him screamed to call for Rex, but he knew the dog had chosen this. Chosen him again. Just like years ago. Just before reaching the exit door, Ethan heard something that stopped him cold. A familiar sound cutting through the storm outside. A police siren. Far away at first, then closer. Blue and red lights began flashing faintly through the rain-streaked windows near the harbor. Backup was finally coming. Ethan exhaled in relief for half a second before realizing something terrible. Rex was still inside the warehouse alone. The flashing police lights outside painted the rain in waves of red and blue as Ethan carried Emma through the side exit into the freezing harbor wind. The little girl buried her face against his shoulder while distant sirens echoed between the warehouses like cries moving through the fog. Two patrol cruisers turned into the loading yard fast, tires hissing across wet pavement before stopping near the main entrance. Officers stepped out immediately, hands near their radios, scanning the darkness. "Officer Walker," one of them shouted through the storm. Ethan barely heard him. His eyes stayed locked on the warehouse behind him, waiting, listening, hoping to hear claws against concrete. But only thunder answered. Emma trembled in his arms. "The dog," she whispered weakly. Ethan swallowed hard. "I know." Paramedics rushed toward them carrying blankets and medical bags. One woman gently took Emma from Ethan's arms while another officer started asking questions about the suspect inside. Ethan answered automatically without really hearing himself speak. Male voice. Heavy boots. Flashlight. Warehouse interior unstable. Somewhere in the middle of the chaos, Ethan turned back toward the dark entrance again. Still nothing. Then finally, from deep inside the warehouse, came the sound of barking. Loud. Fierce. Alive. Ethan moved instantly. "Walker!" "Wait!" Another officer shouted behind him, but Ethan was already running back into the storm. Rain slapped against his face as he crossed the loading dock and entered the warehouse again with flashlight drawn. The barking echoed somewhere near the rear storage area beyond the shipping containers. "Rex!" Ethan called out. His voice bounced through the darkness. The warehouse smelled colder now somehow, emptier after the flashing patrol lights outside faded behind him. Water dripped steadily from broken pipes overhead while the wind pushed rain through cracks in the metal walls. Ethan moved deeper inside, boots splashing across puddles reflecting weak light from his flashlight beam. Then he heard it. A soft whine. Close. Ethan rounded a stack of crates and finally saw him. Rex stood near the far corner of the warehouse beside an old steel door hanging partially open. The shepherd looked exhausted, chest rising heavily, wet fur clinging close to his ribs. But the moment he saw Ethan, his tail moved slowly against the concrete floor. Ethan dropped to one knee beside him immediately. "You stubborn old dog," he whispered roughly. Rex pressed his head gently against Ethan's shoulder for one brief moment before turning back toward the steel door. Ethan noticed scratch marks near the handle. Fresh ones. The door led outside toward the abandoned rail yard behind the harbor. Whoever had taken Emma had escaped through there during the confusion. Distant sirens continued wailing outside, while backup officers spread through the area searching the docks. But Rex remained focused on the darkness beyond the open door. Ethan looked at him carefully. "You want to keep going?" The old shepherd stared back with tired amber eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. Then slowly, despite the rain, despite the years, despite everything life had taken from both of them, Rex stood up again. Ethan felt something shift quietly inside his chest watching him. Not just gratitude, not relief, something warmer, something he had buried beside his wife years ago. Trust. Ethan reached down and adjusted the old leather collar around Rex's neck before standing beside him. "All right, partner," he said softly. "One more time." And together they stepped out into the freezing rain toward the dark rail yard beyond the harbor lights. The abandoned rail yard stretched for nearly half a mile behind the harbor, swallowed by fog and rain drifting off the Pacific like smoke across broken steel tracks. Ethan walked carefully beside Rex through rows of rusted freight cars covered in faded graffiti and salt stains from years of ocean wind. Somewhere far behind them, police lights still flashed near the warehouse, but out here the city felt distant, muted, like the storm itself wanted to bury this place from memory. Rex moved slowly ahead with his nose low to the wet gravel between the tracks. Every few feet he paused, listening, testing the air before continuing deeper into the maze of abandoned train cars. Ethan kept one hand near his flashlight while cold rain soaked through the shoulders of his uniform. "You are too old for this," he murmured quietly toward the dog. Rex ignored him completely. The shepherd stopped suddenly beside an overturned shopping cart tangled in weeds near the tracks. His ears lifted. Ethan followed his gaze toward a dim yellow light glowing faintly inside one of the old freight cars farther ahead. Not electric. Firelight. Somebody was there. Ethan crouched immediately beside a stack of railroad ties and studied the rail car through the rain. The side door stood partially open, just enough for warm orange light to spill across the gravel outside. Smoke drifted upward through the storm, carrying the scent of burnt coffee and wet wood. Rex let out a quiet growl again. Ethan placed one hand gently against the dog's neck. "Easy." They moved closer in silence. Water dripped steadily from the metal roofs overhead, while wind whistled softly between the empty train cars like distant voices. Ethan reached the side of the freight car and carefully peered inside. A small fire burned inside an old metal barrel near the center. Blankets, food cans, a lantern hanging from a hook overhead. And sitting beside the fire was an elderly man wrapped in layers of worn army jackets. Gray beard, weathered hands, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. The old man looked up immediately the moment Ethan entered the doorway. Then his eyes shifted toward Rex. "Well," he muttered softly, "guess the old boy finally found you." Ethan froze. "You know this dog?" The man nodded slowly while pouring coffee from a dented kettle into a chipped mug. "Been feeding him off and on for near 3 winters now." Ethan stepped fully inside the freight car, while Rex remained near the doorway, watching the storm outside. "Why did he come here tonight?" The old man studied Rex carefully before answering. "Because he remembered." Ethan frowned slightly. "Remembered what?" The veteran stared into the fire for several seconds before speaking again. "That girl was not the first kid taken around these docks." Cold silence settled inside the freight car. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof overhead. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "What are you talking about?" The old man reached slowly beneath his blanket and pulled out a faded newspaper clipping folded nearly to pieces. "Missing children. Harbor Point. Different years. Different names. Same district near the abandoned piers." Ethan stared at the articles while thunder rolled somewhere over the ocean. "I tried telling people," the veteran whispered. "Nobody listens to ghosts living in train cars." Rex suddenly stood up near the doorway. Alert again. Focused. Ethan looked back toward him immediately. The dog was staring into the storm beyond the rail yard, listening. Then from somewhere deep in the darkness ahead came the faint sound of a train horn echoing through the rain. And beneath it, another child crying. The crying drifted faintly through the storm like a sound carried from another world. Ethan turned toward the darkness beyond the rail yard while Rex moved immediately toward the tracks without hesitation. The old veteran inside the freight car slowly stood near the fire barrel, his tired eyes fixed on the rain outside. "North Line," he muttered quietly. "That is where the sounds always come from." Ethan looked back sharply. "Always." The old man nodded once. "Kids. Crying. Sometimes late at night when the fog rolls in." Thunder rumbled across the harbor again. Ethan felt cold settle deeper into his chest. Harbor Point had reported missing children for years. Small stories buried beneath larger headlines. Runaways. Custody disputes. Cases that slowly disappeared from television after a few weeks. But now the pieces felt different somehow. Connected. Rex barked once from outside near the tracks, impatient. Ethan turned back toward the veteran. "You should get somewhere warm tonight." The old man gave a tired smile. "Been trying for 20 years. Then he pointed toward Rex. "That dog never stopped searching, officer. Even after you disappeared." Ethan froze at the words. Rain tapped softly against the freight car roof while the fire cracked low inside the barrel. "Disappeared." The word landed heavier than it should have. Because deep down Ethan knew the old man was right. After Olivia died, Ethan had not only lost his wife, he had vanished from his own life. Stopped answering calls. Stopped visiting friends. Stopped caring whether tomorrow arrived at all. And somehow through all those years, Rex had kept looking for him. The realization hurt more than Ethan expected. He swallowed hard and stepped back into the storm. The rail yard stretched endlessly ahead beneath weak industrial lights glowing through the fog. Rex waited near the tracks, body tense, staring north toward a line of abandoned maintenance tunnels built decades earlier beneath the old train station. Ethan remembered them immediately. Flooded service tunnels once used by rail workers before the city shut them down after storm damage years ago. Nobody went there anymore, which made them perfect hiding places. The closer Ethan and Rex moved toward the tunnels, the quieter the world became. Even the storm sounded distant here beneath the rusted overpass and broken signal towers. Water dripped steadily from overhead beams. Somewhere metal creaked softly in the wind. Then the crying came again, clearer this time. A child, very young. Ethan quickened his pace across the wet gravel while Rex surged ahead with sudden energy Ethan had not seen in years. The shepherd stopped near a chain-link fence bent partially open beside the tunnel entrance. Mud covered the ground there. Fresh footprints. Adult size. Recent. Ethan crouched beside them, rain dripping from his hair onto the flashlight beam. Then he noticed something else near the tracks. A small pink sneaker lying alone in the gravel. Child-sized. Ethan picked it up slowly. The fabric was soaked cold from the rain. Rex began whining softly now while staring into the darkness inside the tunnel. Ethan shined his flashlight ahead. Long concrete walls disappeared into blackness beneath the city streets above. Water pooled ankle-deep near the entrance while old electrical wires hung from the ceiling like dead vines. The crying stopped suddenly. Silence swallowed everything. Ethan reached down and rested one hand gently against Rex's neck. The old shepherd looked up at him with those same steady amber eyes that had once followed him through every dark place imaginable. Together, Ethan whispered quietly. Rex stepped forward first into the tunnel darkness, and Ethan followed close behind. The tunnel swallowed light almost immediately after Ethan and Rex stepped inside. Water rippled around Ethan's boots while the flashlight beam shook softly across cracked concrete walls stained dark from decades of flooding. The air smelled old down there. Rust. Mold. Wet earth buried beneath the city. Somewhere overhead, trains groaned faintly through the storm like distant thunder rolling under the streets. Rex moved several feet ahead, his claws clicking lightly against the concrete whenever the water shallowed enough beneath him. Ethan noticed the shepherd limping now. Slightly. The years were finally catching up to him. But still the dog kept moving forward without hesitation. The crying had stopped again. Only silence remained ahead. A terrible kind of silence. The kind that made every small sound feel dangerous. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight while his other hand hovered near the radio clipped to his shoulder. Static still hissed through it. No signal underground. They were alone. The tunnel split ahead into two narrow corridors. Rex paused instantly, sniffing the damp air before turning sharply left toward the older maintenance passage where loose electrical wires hung low from the ceiling. Ethan followed quickly. Water dripped steadily from broken pipes overhead, echoing through the darkness in uneven rhythms that almost sounded like footsteps. Then Rex froze, completely still. Ethan stopped behind him and swept the flashlight ahead. At first he saw nothing except shadows and old graffiti covering the tunnel walls. Then the beam landed on something small near the corner ahead. A stuffed rabbit. Muddy. Torn at one ear. Child-sized. Ethan crouched slowly beside it, his chest tightening. Fresh footprints surrounded the toy in the shallow water. Adult boots. Small sneakers. Recent. Very recent. Rex began growling softly now while staring deeper into the passage. Ethan stood again and moved carefully around the corner. The tunnel widened suddenly into an abandoned underground service station buried beneath the old rail system. Rusted benches lined the walls beside broken vending machines covered in dust and mildew. Lantern light flickered faintly near the far end beside an old maintenance office with the door partially open. Ethan lowered the flashlight immediately. Somebody was there. He listened carefully. A voice. Male. Calm. Humming softly beneath his breath. Ethan felt his heartbeat slow into something colder. Focused. Beside him, Rex stayed low near the ground, muscles tight beneath soaked fur. Ethan whispered carefully, "Stay." But Rex did not take his eyes off the office door. Then came another sound. Tiny. Fragile. A child coughing inside the room. Ethan moved forward silently through the flooded station. Every step felt painfully loud in the water. The humming stopped instantly. Silence crashed through the tunnel. Ethan reached the side of the office doorway and slowly angled the flashlight toward the opening. The room inside looked strangely ordinary. Blankets folded near a portable heater. Canned food stacked against the wall. Children's drawings taped unevenly beside an old train schedule. And sitting quietly on a mattress in the corner was a little boy no older than 6 wrapped in an oversized coat. His eyes widened the moment he saw Ethan's police badge. Before Ethan could speak, a metal door slammed somewhere deeper inside the station. Fast footsteps echoed through the tunnel beyond the office. Running away, Rex barked once and lunged forward instantly into the darkness. Ethan cursed under his breath and turned toward the child. "You are safe now," he said quickly while kneeling beside him. The boy's lips trembled. "The dog came back," he whispered softly. Ethan looked toward the dark tunnel where Rex had disappeared. Then he heard it. One sharp bark echoing far ahead underground, followed by complete silence. Silence inside the tunnel felt heavier after Rex's bark disappeared into the darkness ahead. Ethan looked down at the little boy sitting on the mattress, pale beneath the weak lantern glow, arms wrapped tightly around himself against the cold. "What is your name?" Ethan asked gently while kneeling beside him. "Lucas," the boy whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "Lucas, I need you to stay right here for 1 minute, okay? Police officers are coming." The child hesitated before speaking again. "The dog told me somebody would come." Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly. He glanced toward the dark tunnel where Rex had vanished. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling outside the maintenance office, while distant thunder rolled somewhere above the city streets. Ethan removed his radio again, finally catching a burst of static strong enough to push through underground interference. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I found another child alive beneath the old North Rail tunnels. Send emergency response immediately." The signal cracked violently before fading again, but it was enough. Ethan hoped somebody heard it. Then came the sound of claws scraping faintly against wet concrete far ahead in the darkness, followed by a low growl. Ethan stood instantly. "Stay here, Lucas." The boy grabbed Ethan's sleeve nervously. "Please do not leave the dog alone." Those words hit harder than they should have. Ethan looked at the frightened child beside the lantern light and suddenly saw himself years ago sitting alone in a hospital hallway after losing Olivia. Same fear, same helplessness. And beside that memory was Rex. Always Rex, waiting beside him in silence when words stopped working. Ethan gently squeezed Lucas's shoulder once before stepping back into the flooded station. The tunnel ahead looked darker now somehow, as though the storm above had stolen the last traces of light from underground. Ethan followed the growling carefully through the narrow passage while his flashlight beam bounced across broken pipes and crumbling concrete walls. Then he saw movement ahead, near the collapsed maintenance stairs. Rex stood there blocking the passage, soaked fur bristling, body tense despite exhaustion. Across from him stood a man wearing a rain jacket and old work boots, half hidden in shadow near the stairwell leading upward toward the abandoned train depot. The man looked older than Ethan expected. Thin, hollow-eyed, more tired than dangerous. One hand trembled slightly beside him, while rainwater dripped steadily from the hood covering most of his face. Rex growled deeper when the man shifted his weight. Ethan raised the flashlight slowly. "It is over," he said firmly. The man looked toward Rex instead of Ethan. Strange sadness flickered across his face beneath the dim light. "That dog kept finding them," he whispered quietly. "Every time." Ethan stepped closer, move away from the stairs. But the man barely seemed to hear him. His eyes remained fixed on Rex with something close to regret. "You know what happens to forgotten people in this city, officer." Rainwater dripped through cracks overhead between them. "Nobody sees them until they disappear." Ethan tightened his jaw. Those children needed help. The man lowered his head slightly. "I never hurt them." Ethan stayed silent. Because somehow he believed him. Broken heaters, blankets, food, drawings on the walls. This was not cruelty. It was something lonelier. sadder. A mind lost somewhere between isolation and delusion. Then Rex suddenly stopped growling. The old shepherd took one slow step forward instead. Come now. Watching. The man looked down at him and quietly began to cry. Not loudly, just small, exhausted tears falling into the tunnel water beneath him. And for the first time that night, Ethan saw not a monster standing there in the darkness. Just another lost soul nobody noticed until it was too late. Rain still pounded Harbor Point by the time emergency crews finally reached the underground station beneath the old rail tunnels. Flashlights cut through the darkness while paramedics wrapped Lucas in warm blankets near the maintenance office. The little boy refused to let go of the stuffed rabbit Ethan had found earlier in the tunnel. Above them, police radios crackled nonstop with updates from the Harbor District while officers carefully escorted the trembling man from the stairwell without resistance. He never looked up once, just kept staring toward the flooded tunnel floor as though ashamed to exist beneath the weight of real light again. Ethan stood near the edge of the underground platform beside Rex while the chaos moved around them. The old German shepherd looked exhausted now, more than exhausted. His breathing had become shallow beneath the damp fur clinging tightly against his ribs. Ethan knelt beside him immediately. Hey, he whispered softly. Stay with me. Rex slowly lifted his eyes toward Ethan at the sound of his voice. The shepherd's tail moved once against the wet concrete, then stopped. Ethan removed his jacket and wrapped it gently over the dog's back despite the cold biting through his own uniform. One of the paramedics nearby glanced over. Your dog needs a vet tonight, she said carefully. Ethan nodded without taking his eyes off Rex. I know. Somewhere behind them, Lucas suddenly spoke from inside the blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He slept beside us every night. Ethan turned slightly. What? The little boy looked toward Rex with tired eyes. The dog. His voice trembled softly. When it got scary underground, he stayed near the door. Silence settled heavily around Ethan for several seconds. He looked back at Rex again, remembering all the missing years after the shepherd disappeared from his life. Harbor Point believed the old K9 had wandered off and died somewhere alone. But instead Rex had spent those years searching the docks, guarding frightened children nobody else even knew existed. Ethan felt something crack quietly inside him then. Something grief had frozen for years. One of the officers approached holding a flashlight low. Walker, the captain wants your statement upstairs. Ethan barely heard him. His hand rested gently against Rex's soaked neck while rainwater dripped from the tunnel ceiling around them. In a minute, he answered quietly. The officer nodded and walked away. Rex shifted slightly closer until his head rested against Ethan's knee. Warm, heavy, trusting. Ethan closed his eyes for a second as memories rose again without warning. Olivia sitting on their apartment floor laughing while Rex chased wrapping paper every Christmas morning. Long night shifts ending with the dog asleep beside the patrol car heater. Hospital hallways. Empty rooms. Whiskey bottles left untouched near dawn because a German shepherd refused to leave him alone long enough to disappear completely. Ethan opened his eyes slowly and leaned closer to the old dog. You never stopped looking for me, did you? Rex stared back silently beneath the flickering tunnel lights. Outside, thunder rolled softer now as the storm finally began moving north along the coast. The city above them was waking slowly toward dawn. But underground, time seemed suspended around the old police dog lying beside Ethan Walker. Then Rex lifted his head weakly one last time and gently pressed his muzzle into Ethan's hand. And for the first time since losing Olivia, Ethan finally cried. 3 weeks later, the rain finally stopped over Harbor Point. Morning sunlight spilled softly across the harbor for the first time in days, turning the water gold beneath the fishing boats drifting near the docks. The city felt quieter now, gentler somehow. News vans had long disappeared from the station parking lot. The missing children were home with their families again. Reporters moved on to newer stories. Bigger stories. Cities always do. But inside Harbor Point Police Department, one story refused to fade. Ethan Walker stood outside the veterinary clinic on Maple Street, holding 2 paper cups of coffee while cold autumn wind moved through the trees overhead. His patrol cruiser waited at the curb nearby, freshly washed beneath the pale morning sun. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared through the clinic window without moving. Then the front door opened slowly. Rex stepped outside first. Older, slower. A thin gray scar, now visible beneath the fur along his shoulder, where years of hard living had finally caught up to him. But his amber eyes remained steady. Alive. The veterinary technician smiled softly behind him. He is stubborn, she said. Ethan almost laughed at that. Almost. Rex walked carefully down the clinic steps before stopping beside Ethan like he had done 1,000 times before. Wind lifted lightly through the dog's fur, while traffic hummed quietly somewhere downtown. Ethan crouched slowly and rested one hand against the old leather collar still hanging around Rex's neck. The brass tag had been cleaned now, the name easier to read beneath the sunlight. Rex. Ethan swallowed hard as memories drifted quietly through him again. Hospital hallways. Empty apartments. Rain-soaked docks. Underground tunnels. Every lonely mile between grief and grace somehow traced back to this dog. The veterinary technician folded her arms against the cold breeze. Most retired canine dogs do not make it through years alone out there, she said gently. Ethan looked down at Rex. Yeah, he answered softly. He had a habit of saving people. Rex glanced toward the patrol cruiser parked nearby. His ears lifted immediately. Ethan noticed it and slowly stood. You remember it, huh? The old shepherd took a few careful steps toward the vehicle without waiting for permission. Same path. Same side door. Ethan reached the cruiser first and opened the passenger door quietly. For one brief moment, Rex simply stood there staring at the empty seat inside. The exact seat he used to occupy during night patrols years ago before loss scattered both their lives into darkness. Then slowly, with tired but determined legs, the old German shepherd climbed into the cruiser and settled onto the seat like he had never truly left. Ethan stood there watching him while sunlight reflected softly across the windshield. No sirens, no storms, no fear, just silence, warm and peaceful, the kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. Ethan finally slid into the driver's seat and rested his hand lightly against Rex's neck. The old shepherd closed his eyes beneath the touch. Outside, Harbor Point continued moving through another ordinary morning. People crossing streets, coffee shops opening, boats leaving the marina. Nobody noticing the old police dog sitting quietly inside the cruiser beside the man he never gave up on. Ethan looked ahead through the windshield as the engine started softly beneath them. Ready to go home, partner? Rex opened his eyes at the sound of Ethan's voice and rested his head gently beside the center console. And for the first time in many years, Ethan Walker drove through the city feeling like he was no longer alone.